All right, let's talk about Gaza. There's a new, pretty major US-backed plan on the table for what happens next, and it's called the Border of Peace. So what we're going to do is break down exactly what this is, who's involved, and, the big question, can it actually work where so many other plans haven't?
I mean, this is it, right? This is the million-dollar question that's been hanging over everything. Who is actually going to govern Gaza after the war? Now, there's a fragile ceasefire in place, and the international community, with the U.S. really taking the lead, thinks it has a concrete answer.
Okay, so what is this answer? Well, the White House has just announced the creation of something with a very ambitious name, a Board of Peace. Let's dive into what that actually means and what its job is supposed to be.
So here's the official line. The plan, which apparently both Israel and Hamas agreed to back in October, sets up this Board of Peace as an international watchdog, really. Its main job? To supervise the day-to-day governance of Gaza during this really critical transition phase. The whole idea is to get from active conflict to some kind of stable government.
Right, so who's actually on this board? I mean, this is a pretty high-stakes job. The initial list is, it's packed with some very big international names. And honestly, who they picked really tells you a lot about what the priorities of this whole plan are.
First up, leading the whole thing as chairman, is U.S. President Donald Trump himself. So that right there signals just how direct and top level the American involvement is meant to be.
And joining him is his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. That puts the full diplomatic muscle of the State Department right at the center of the board's work.
Then you have former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He's on the board too, and, given his long and, let's say, complex history in the region, his name definitely raised a few eyebrows.
And look who's back, Jared Kushner. You'll remember him as a key architect of Middle East policy during the Trump presidency. So he's being brought back to the table, presumably to leverage that past experience. Now, this one is interesting. They've also brought in Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank. And that tells you a lot, right? It signals a huge focus on the money side of things. We're talking funding, reconstruction, and keeping a close eye on the finances in Gaza.
And the list doesn't stop there. Rounding out the board are some other key players from diplomacy and finance, people like Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Executive Mark Rowan. But this next one is really important. There's a crucial on-the-ground role, the High Representative for Gaza. That job goes to Nikolai Mladinov, who you might know as the former UN Middle East envoy. He's essentially going to be the board's main diplomat in the region.
Okay, so this Board of Peace, it's actually just one piece of a bigger puzzle. The whole plan is a three-layered system for managing Gaza's transition. Let's take a look at how all these pieces are supposed to fit together.
So here are the three layers. Think of it like a pyramid. At the base, you've got a Palestinian technocratic committee. Their job is to handle all the day-to-day stuff. In the middle, you have the Board of Peace, providing that international oversight we talked about. And then, at the top, responsible for security, you've got an international stabilization force.
And we actually have names for the people leading those other two layers, which is pretty significant. The Palestinian Committee, that's going to be headed by Ali Shath. He's actually from Gaza and was a former deputy minister in the Palestinian Authority. Then for security, the International Stabilization Force will be led by a U.S. Major General, Jasper Jeffers, who's a former Special Ops commander.
So, as you can probably guess, a plan this big with so many high-profile names attached, it didn't exactly land without a bit of controversy and criticism. To really get why, we need to unpack two things: the structure of the plan itself and the recent history that got us to this point.
Okay, so one of the biggest criticisms you're hearing, especially from rights experts and advocates, is about the very structure of the board. The idea of a foreign president directly supervising the governance of another territory, they're saying it looks a lot like an old-school colonial model.
And remember Tony Blair? His appointment has also been a major point of contention. You just can't separate his name from his role in the 2003 Iraq War, which is still an incredibly sore spot in the Middle East. So for many, his inclusion here is a real problem. Now, to understand how we got here, this timeline is absolutely key. It all kicked off with the Hamas-led attack on Israel back in October 2023. That was followed by Israel's major assault on Gaza. It took 2 full years before a fragile ceasefire finally went into effect in October 2025. And that is what set the stage for this Board of Peace announcement in January of 2026.
So the plan's out there, the names have been announced, but what now? The hard reality is that this whole ambitious structure is being built on some pretty shaky ground. To put it mildly, the future is incredibly uncertain.
Get this. Since the ceasefire officially started back in October, there have been more than 443 reported casualties. That includes both Palestinian civilians and Israeli soldiers. I mean, that number alone just shows you how fragile this peace actually is.
And on top of that, there are some massive fundamental issues that are just not resolved. You've got both sides constantly accusing each other of violating the ceasefire. You still have reports of severe aid shortages in Gaza. And here's the big one. Hamas still hasn't publicly committed to full disarmament, which is an absolute deal-breaker for Israel.
So it all comes down to this, doesn't it? On one hand, you have the Board of Peace, a really structured, internationally backed plan. But on the other hand, you have these deep, deep conflicts, the violence that's still happening, and all these huge unresolved issues. So the question is, can this actually create a new path forward? Or are we just watching the beginning of another chapter in a very long book of failed peace plans?